Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you.
And welcome to Spybrary episode 274. Today we are talking all about probably my favorite city in the world, Berlin. We are talking with James Stejskal. He is making his return to Spybrary. He has published a book called Berlin, A Spy's Guide to its Cold War History in Story and Image. Jim, if you don't know, served for 23 years with Special Forces, including 2 tours in Berlin, retiring as a Chief Warrant Officer 4. He then served 13 years with the CIA as a case officer in Africa, Europe, and Asia. He is an author of fiction, spy books, as well as this one. And another of my favorites, Jim, I think it's how you first come on my radar, Special Forces Berlin, which I read several years ago and thoroughly enjoyed.
One of my favorites, too.
Yeah, it's all about the clandestine Cold War operations of the U.S. Army's elite 1956 to 1990, which is Spybrary approved and highly recommend. So, Jim, you write on the back of this book, The City of Spies. Many cities have laid claim to the title City of Spies. Vienna, London, Moscow, even Miami. But no city has earned it more than Berlin. So for you, as someone who worked in Berlin, who writes now about Berlin, why is Berlin the City of Spies?
And I insist that it remains a city of spies as well. Berlin was really, along with Vienna, right after World War II in 1945, was really the focal point between two completely different political and military systems: the Soviet Union and what became the Warsaw Pact, and then the United States and the Allies, which eventually coalesced into NATO. Vienna eventually dropped off the list to some extent, because it was no longer divided between the occupying powers. Berlin, however, a unique place, being the former capital of Germany and 100 miles inside East German territory, with British, French, American, and Russian occupying forces in the city, as well as all their intelligence communities were there. And a lot of the NATO and Warsaw Pact countries had intelligence operatives working in that country, trying to find out the things they needed for their political and military use. So it was like the focal point, an isolated outpost deep within East Germany, but the focal point of both political and espionage machinations from 1945 until 1990. And it's continued on today. So as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of other countries that are in competition, but they never quite reached the level that city did.
I 1000% agree with you. It won't come as a surprise to regular listeners. A question for you. How old were you when you first arrived in Berlin?
Whoa. I'm not really good at mathematics, Shane. 23. Right. Yeah.
So 23, first visit to Berlin from the US. What was that like for you as a young man? Could you walk us through what Berlin was like?
Well, it was not my first visit outside the United States. And I'm not counting Mexico and Canada because those are too easy. I had been to Europe, but coming into Berlin was just a pretty amazing experience. It reminded me very much of my first trips of going to New York or any other big city. The difference was it was very much, as I described before, it was a cauldron. Almost at times we called it living in the zoo because we were surrounded by a fence, or potentially living inside the world's largest POW camp because we were so far inside communist territories. So it was very For me, it was very interesting being a student of military history, of German history, being inside the former capital of Germany, and then being on the front lines between this existential struggle between two political systems, communism and the capitalism, west and east on either side. It was really sort of a heady time, going in that as a young man. And that's basically where I learned the essentials. I didn't know this at the time. I was learning the essentials of what would become my lifelong trade, which was special operations, especially underground type operations, and espionage. And where better to learn this than inside Berlin, the capital of spies.
What was it like? I've always wondered this. What was it like for you then as a serviceman, as a member of the military? Because you could go up to the observation platforms along the wall, if you were allowed to, and you could look the enemy in the eyes. You could see their eyeballs, which is very unique, isn't it?
It is, and it was. It was very strange because on a couple of occasions we actually got a bit too close, and the East Germans would let loose with a single round over our head just to give us a warning. I'm not going to tell you what we did in response, but we were also in the position of having incredible intelligence. We were, like I said, deep behind enemy lines, but we had available to us a tremendous amount of information from both our satellite technology and from radio intercept technology, as well as all the information that the intelligence services from the Allies and our own, both military and civilian, were providing us. So we knew probably more about what our eventual target set would be than I'd ever seen before. We had incredible information on locations and personalities. So we had an advantage, I think, for what might have become our wartime mission. So on one hand, you're kind of going, well, we're behind the lines, we're outnumbered, and then on the other hand, you're saying, well, but we are sort of in the catbird seat because we know what's going on, and it was just an amazing experience. Much different than my earlier service with a conventional airborne unit or a special forces unit in the States. And the unit itself was very unique. There was no other unit like it in the military, and we, in a lot of ways, we were on our own. Nobody else in the military knew precisely what we were up to, and I'll have to say that we took advantage of that quite a bit. We had an incredible commander when I first got there, a Czech refugee who fought in World War II, and a sergeant major who was a German refugee and had been part of the werewolves at the end of the war. Luckily, he saw the writing on the wall and quickly surrendered to the Americans. But both of these guys were sort of Eastern Europeans, and they knew what we were up against and why we had to train sometimes unusual ways and sometimes ways that the rest of the army might have gone flipped out about, to put it frankly, because they let us do things that we would never get away with according to Army safety regulations or Army regulations per se. So it was a great assignment. I can talk about it for hours.
Well, maybe we should do that on another occasion. I know I usually send people, I think you did a really good interview. I'm going back now with Spycast on Special Forces Berlin. You've also been on our good friend Ian's Cold War conversations, so maybe I can pop those in the link, and maybe we can chat about this if listeners want to hear more in the future. I am keen to dig into your Berlin spy guide, but I can't let you go without asking you questions such as, what was your interactions like with, or did you have interactions then with ordinary East German citizens? And I asked that because I was born in 75. So, of course, I was too young to ever go to East Berlin or the German Democratic Republic. So I have to read a lot of history books. And a lot of spy books are also written by people who were ducking and diving in Berlin. But what was your interaction with the average East German like when you crossed over the wall?
That was difficult. We did not have, when I was in the Army, we did not have the occasion to interact with the East Germans a great deal, but we did have to some extent. And basically, I think you would meet with the same kind of reaction you would meet talking to a Russian in Moscow. If they knew you were an American, or even a West Berliner or a West German, they would be very apprehensive about dealing with you. Even when we went shopping in stores, as soon as they picked up, and most Americans would travel into East Berlin in uniform. We had permission to travel over there with our little identification card. Whether or not it was in your proper name was another thing.
Yeah.
Oh, and we could travel sometimes as military and sometimes as civilian, but it didn't matter. As soon as they picked up that you were not an East Berliner, then they were a suspect. And they just didn't want to have any dealings with us because I think East Germany was about somewhere around 15, 16 million people, but about 200,000 of those were informants for the Ministry for State Security. So you didn't know who you were talking to, and they didn't know who was listening to them talking to you. So they were scared. I had one incident over there. I had to be reminded about this by one of my friends. I was bringing back a car from West Germany, a brand new Saab I had bought. And I had not replaced the tax plates, which were these oval German plates, with the U.S. Forces plates that we were supposed to have. So I was driving between West Germany and West Berlin through East Germany, and my partner said, "I'm hungry. Let's stop at an imbus and get something to eat," something you were not supposed to do. But we were young and dumb. So I stopped. And we went to an imbus, got some food, and everybody's looking at this Saab, which, they've seen Trabants and other cars like that, but they haven't seen too many Western cars, and they were all oohing and eyeing. And the plates on there said West Germany, so they thought we were from West Germany. And somebody made the mistake of asking, and we were conversing with them in German, where we were from. And we said the United States. And as soon as we said that, the place became deserted. They just went. They had no desire to be caught talking to an American. Anyway, that sort of was my summary of what it could be like to talk to these people. We had one guy who was a German in our unit who spoke, flawless German, obviously. He went over there on a trip, and he was wearing a raincoat over his uniform. He sat down and had about a 2-hour talk with an East German about things that are going on. And finally, he said the German wanted to know where he was from specifically, and he said, "Oh, I'm from the United States." He was an American citizen now. And the East German wouldn't believe him. Until he opened up his raincoat, and he was wearing his Class A uniform underneath. Which at that point, the same thing happened. The guy got up and said, "I'm leaving now."
Yeah, I can imagine.
Dangerous things. So and that was part of the difficulty for all intelligence operations in Eastern Europe. The CIA, MI6 or SIS, I should say, even the French. Well, the French had a French accent, so they were giveaways. It was very difficult to operate in those denied areas. The surveillance was so pervasive and so many informants, and difficult.
Yeah, and I think this is what plays into the whole City of Spies, whether it's spy fiction or spy history. It's just, such a unique theater for those actions. For you, when you would cross over to the east in uniform, how did they treat you at the border?
I never had an issue with the East Germans. A certain amount of, you could see it in their eyes. There was a certain amount of derision. They did not like Americans. This was also a period, 1970s, when the East Germans knew the American military was having issues because of Vietnam. So you could see that and feel that. But at the same time, I would run into Russians at the Alexanderplatz. And we would kind of have a 2-minute stare off and then actually get closer to each other. And there was a certain amount of soldier to soldier camaraderie there that would come across, not so much with the border guards. Civilian clothes, as soon as they saw that or figured out you're American, like I said, they would back off. But if they didn't know that, then they would treat you like just about any other stranger, I think, so with a certain amount of deference.
When we were jumping on just before we jumped on the interview, James, being the spy that he is, noticed that I have a GDR-made set of binoculars here, and you were sharing that you have a pair as well, that you picked yours up in East Berlin. I suspect I bought mine on eBay or a flea market in Leipzig or something. But so Jim is showing us this. For those who are listening, Jim's showing us the binoculars. You can watch that on the YouTube channel.
Probably the biggest reason for Americans or Brits or French to go to East Berlin was to go to the stores and buy things like Czech glassware. I was into optics. I had a East German camera at one time. I've forgotten the nomenclature, but these I bought there, and they're my favorite binoculars I've ever used. A pair of Carl Zeiss 10 by 50s that were made in East Germany. But due to the vagaries of the monetary market, I was able to purchase them for the grand sum of about $10. And I've had them ever since, taking them to Africa and every place else. There were bargains to be had.
I can imagine. You write a bit about shopping, of course, in Berlin, a spy's guide, and you write about KaDeWe. And I was thinking about it when I was reading the book, that I've been to Berlin 20 times plus, at least. 20 times at least. I've never stepped foot in KaDeWe, believe it or not.
You have to. You have to. I mean, KaDeWe, picture Harrods, but in German.
Yes.
It's a huge store. I generally never spend more than about 30 seconds on any of the 5 floors or 4 floors below the 5th floor. Because the 5th floor is the food hall.
Yes.
And the food hall is bigger than Harrods. And there's about 60 small restaurants within it. But you kind of walk around it in a circle, and you go from the canned goods to the bread section, which has about 200 different kinds of bread. You go into the meat section, and then they have a section that's for Wild, for the game, venison and boar and pheasant and all that. You go into the fish section, smells like a fish section, but it's huge. And then you get this magnificent cheese section, which smells like you're in the middle of Limburg. What else? Alcohol.
But in terms
and they've
of
got bars.
In terms of, and you've just outlined the reasons why I didn't really go there, right? Because it's like Harrods in London. I've probably only been there 2 or 3 times, to be honest with you, James. But why did you include KaDeWe in the Spy Guides book that you've written?
Well, KaDeWe was also a great place to do agent meetings, especially for the Stasi and KGB, because they had a reason to go there, the Russians. And we did the same thing in the East Berlin with their version of it, which was not magnificent. It was called the Centrum. The only cool thing they had in that place was the railway stuff, the
model railway,
the model railways, which I could spend hours in. In fact, I wrote about it in my first novel. But it was such a huge store, like Harrods. It's got many, many entrances and exits, 7 different floors, 6 actually. And you could conduct a quick meeting any place in that store without getting watched, because nobody can surveil you inside the place without flooding it with maybe 100 counter surveillance officers.
Yeah.
So that's why I put it in, and we used it for training. And amazingly enough, you would often notice things that would be going on there, and we reported a number of operations that we stumbled on. That's another reason why I said this is the city of spies. You could go downtown any day of the week or any night, and you would notice some kind of intelligence or possibly criminal operations going on, but just all the time.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be adding it to my must-visit list. Now, it's got two of my favorite things, right? Food and spies. So there's a spy connection. So I will go to KaDeWe. I have been to Centrum, which I have to tell you is still a depressing place today. It's not the greatest of malls.
Yeah.
I didn't see any
and the railway and the model trains have gotten much more expensive.
I didn't even see any of those. So yeah, no, absolutely. So before we dig into some of the aspects of Berlin: A Spy's Guide, what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, Berlin, like I said, that's where I learned my trade, and I left Berlin, of course, but the city never really left me. And it has been the foundation, the base for a lot of my writing, and it just keeps coming back. And I was talking to my publisher, and we were talking about fiction, and he said, "What can you give me nonfiction?" And I went through a couple of different subjects I worked on, and he said, "What about Berlin?" And we came up with the idea to write basically a tour guide, not so much a tour guide, but a travel log, probably more. And it all came together. There's a lot of photos and information in there that I've just collected over the years from my first time there. Photos, obviously, from back in 1977 up till the present. I went back into the Stasi archives to draw on them, the West German archives and the American archives. The SIS is a bit more reticent to share their information, but I have talked to a few people, and all that came together to fuse into this book.
I'm glad you've written it because, there are a ton of Berlin tourist books, right, which all serve a purpose, but none that are really digging into the spy sites. And when we were chatting beforehand, I said, well, let's discuss maybe, 3 must-visit sites for spy fans, because I recognize that many of our listeners have not visited Berlin yet, so let's do that. But then also I wanted to look at some of the off-the-beaten-track stuff as well for those who've been or are regular visitors to Berlin. Before we do that, there's a question I'm going to ask you. I have a very dear friend of mine, grew up in East Berlin, and he gets really angry when he reads spy fiction or even historical books that's particularly a lot of East German spies would say in fiction. They came out of East Berlin and it was like going from a black and white movie into color. Was that your experience, Jim, or is this Western propaganda?
I would probably be one of the guys that would anger your friend, because coming out of West Berlin and going into East Germany or into East Berlin, it was like, lights on, lights off. There was a definite difference. It was gray, and I remember going into East Berlin the first time in about 1977, sometime during the year, and it was a winter day, and unfortunately the East Germans burned lignite coal, brown coal, and even in West Berlin it was an issue. But over there it was just sort of a brownish gray pallor that was all over the city. It was gray already because I believe it was winter time, but the buildings are gray. There was artwork in some places, especially around Alexanderplatz, but mostly it was drab. And you just see that everywhere. And there was still a lot of rubble from World War II, buildings that had been partially destroyed that were still standing. Some of those would later be knocked down completely. Others would be restored, but that would be 1990. So it was, as far as I'm concerned, a great place.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that kind of corroborates everything I've read, but just with you being there and you know, you're not here on the altar of propaganda. You're sharing your real life experience with us. So who better to ask than your good self, James?
Well, that's the third man, Orson Welles, and everything else. The fact that they shot it in black and white was perfect,
Yeah.
and I associate that with my early times in Berlin very much. It's sort of in black and white.
And in terms of the German language, could you already speak German before they sent you, or were you trained out there?
I was trained to sort of a middle level on German. In fact, when I first went over there, everybody thought I was French because my teacher in the United States came from Alsace-Lorraine.
Right.
French was her first language, German her second, but she spoke with a slight French accent, and I picked it up. It would take a while for me to get up to the proper level. Probably, I had, when I left Berlin, what in the military they call a 4.4, and there's a possibility of getting a 5.5, but that's very rare. So I was able to, remember this well, I was able to speak and think in German without translating. And I had dreams in German. So I figured at that point, I knew I was doing pretty well. The second time up there, I eventually was rated as a 5.5, which is native level fluency. So I've lost a lot of it now because I don't get the chance to speak it. I still have to do a lot of reading. I don't get a chance to speak it.
It's something I've always wondered about with those who do covert work is language. Because, I love languages, I love learning languages, but, especially with my German, I'm prone to using the wrong case or the wrong ending or what. And you think, wow, you're banged to rights there, aren't you, as a spy? You don't speak the language properly, you make that one mistake. There's that great line in the movie The Great Escape, isn't it, with Gordon Jackson, when the Gestapo officer says good luck, and he says thank you.
Yeah.
Completely rumbled. They have to, after all that hard work. And I always admire those in the clandestine services that get the language to such, especially if it wasn't their mother tongue, right? That's
or the scene in Inglorious Bastards when they're in the bar in the basement and he's the SS officer is pointing them out by Mr. München, Mr. Cologne, Mr. I don't know where.
Yeah.
So he couldn't pin down the one language, or the one accent. One of these days I have to tell you my joke about the difference between overt, covert, and clandestine. But generally, the only people that have to be totally fluent, assured of their language is a non-official cover person who is portraying themselves as a native of a country.
Yes.
Most intelligence officers do not have that skill, that level of language.
Right.
So if they're recruiting somebody or working with somebody, that asset generally knows where they're from. Now, they might portray themselves as being from another country. Like an American could say they're from South Africa or Australia or something like that, Canada. But so the criticality of language there is only for those guys that are in non-official cover. So,
Got it.
Yeah. Anyway.
But still, major respect to them because, it's very easy to slip up.
Exactly. You still have to speak it well enough that you can get what you need and not upset them with some obscure nuance in the language that's going to set them off.
I find it fascinating as a lifelong language learner because there's two listeners of the show whose names I won't reveal who served, and one was in the Soviet Union and one was in the Middle East, and they learned Arabic and Russian, but they were taught in the service. They didn't come, because I said, oh, did you study Russian at university? We're like, gosh, no, because they were being watched by the Soviets, so they would recruit people who didn't. I said, oh yeah, of course, it makes sense, right? It's not like the old days. But anyway, let's not make this a Duolingo episode of Spybrary, although it would be fun to do it in German one day. So let's just look at 3 sites maybe. So if someone who hasn't been to Berlin before, loves spy fiction, loves espionage history, what would be the first place you recommend they must visit, James?
Well, if they're really interested in spy history, I mean, beyond the usual, Checkpoint Charlie and things like that, my first visit would either be, well, this is going to be, no, it's not. My first visit is going to be the Stasi Museum.
Mm-hmm.
The Stasi Museum in Lichtenberg, in Berlin, not too far from city center. It is an incredible overview of what the Stasi was doing to its own people. It talks to some extent about its foreign intelligence operations, but not as much. The big thing is this is basically a memorial to the East German people that were persecuted by the Nazis. And they give a very good, it's basically 3 floors of how they operated. And it's everything from surveillance and listening devices to their interrogation methods, how they recruited people. And if you're a German, actually anybody, you can go into the records there with special application and find out what they knew about you.
Have you done that,
Which you
James?
may or may not want to do that. Yes, I did. When I was reading, they had nothing.
Really?
Yeah. I went into the East German files. The Russians may possibly, I don't know. I went into the East German files to write the book on Special Forces in Berlin, and it took about 6 months, but I got about 500 pages of information back of what they thought might be related to it, and it was really only 2 or 3 pages of information that pertained directly to us. So they did not know a great deal. They know the unit. They knew the unit was there, but they did not know much about what it was supposed to do. Now you could infer, obviously, because we're a special forces unit, that we were there to do damage, which they did. It's the same thing that we would think about their own special purpose forces. But they didn't have anything on me, and I think only 2 names of people from the unit, and they were long gone anyway. So anyway,
mission accomplished.
But
then
it's a well, for the most part. So that's number 1. I think that's a really good place to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it can be a little bit away from the touristy spots, but it's well worth, jumping on the tube to get there, or get yourself an Uber if needs be. And again, I must have been a dozen times, and there's always something new. I always come out going, I wish I had more time in there today. Because, when you go to Berlin, it's usually a 3-day trip. You're trying to squeeze everything in. But I would say, I would agree with you. And also those offices have been used in, same as Hohenschönhausen, which we may get onto, in quite a lot of TV shows, Deutschland 86 to 89 in particular. You see a lot of that. And The Same Sky, which is a series I wished it didn't get commissioned for its 2nd series, and I really wish it had, but we might get into that in a moment. Also, it's funny, I think the first time I went to Normannenstrasse, I was actually, no word of a lie, right, James? I was listening to Berlin Game by Len Deighton audiobook as I was walking around Berlin, and it was at that very scene at the end of Berlin Game, which I won't ruin it for those. What do you mean? You've never read Berlin Game? Come on, listeners. It's the best spy book ever written. But there's a scene at the end set at the Stasi headquarters, and it's so authentic. And I was like, wow, he's really described this so very well, because they didn't put him in the jail. They had him up in an office. He wasn't getting a proper interrogation for reasons that you'll have to read the book to find out. But I thought Len's really captured this place. So I'm with you. I think it's essential visiting. And of course, you get to visit Milka's office, which is a highlight or a low light, depending on your viewpoint. But to walk into that room and to sit, well, they don't like to sit, but to stand and, imagine the conversations that took place there incredible.
It was, and I've been there on numerous occasions. The first time was in January of 1990.
Wow.
And that's where that came from. That's off the front portico of the headquarters. Anyway, and I also the Stasi used to use a seal, for sealing their safes in their offices. I acquired this later, but I did manage through the place to pick some of the wax off of different doors that hadn't yet been cleaned up.
Wow.
And I've kept that forever, along with a seal, so I can make my own. I can seal my own safe if I have to. But I've been back there several times, and I just really enjoy it.
What was the mood like in January 1990 then, when you were looking through the place?
At that particular location, there was a combination of effervescence. The people were charged up about what was happening, but there was also a hell of a lot of hostility directed at the people who were still working in the place. And the people in the place were trying to destroy the files at the same time while not being overrun by the East Berliners. So it was hectic.
Because I guess there was no one stopping them, right? It didn't suddenly become United Germany after the war. There was that period of time.
It was a period of time. And they were overwhelmed in the headquarters because there were thousands of people. Nothing they could do about it. What they did try to do was just lock down some of the places. And the key place they did lock down, they managed to secure, and we did not get into it later, was HVA, which was the foreign intelligence. So,
Marcus Wolf's fiefdom.
Yes, indeed. An interesting personality there. I did get to meet him later.
You did?
At a book signing, in Berlin. I got his autograph.
Wow. And was it just a quick chat? I know what these things are like.
It was a quick chat, and I did not really, because I was still working at the time, I did not want to share my details with him, because I didn't know if he was a contractor or not. But he was signing books, and I chatted with him briefly. And, said I'm an American and I was stationed here, and he had some photos, and I have a signed photo from him.
Wow. So, very envious of that. It's funny, just a wee bit of a tangent, but a friend of mine, his dad was in HVA and passed now, but he said, towards the end of his life, they'd be watching the news and some German politician would come up, and occasionally his dad would be like, should see this files we've got on her, boy. And like, it was so funny to hear that from this, 80-odd-year-old Stasi guy. It was like, what they knew about everybody. So Normannenstrasse, definitely agree with you on that. Where would your second pick be, James?
Well, if I'm a newcomer to Berlin and still interested in spies, I'm going to say the Brandenburg Gate, not the gate specifically, although it's a very good place to meet and see, but the radius around it, because there's just so much there. You've got the Hotel Adlon, which figures in a number of books, although it's been radically rebuilt.
Yes.
And is radically expensive.
Yes.
But you've got the former headquarters of the SS or the Gestapo, which is called Topography of Terror, which is World War II, obviously. You've got the Russian, the French, the UK embassies, which have all been rebuilt there. And you've got the Checkpoint Charlie, of course, which has a museum, which needs updating badly.
Right.
But that is the focal point of all the tourism in Berlin, I think. And any one day you can probably see 20,000 people wandering around that area. But it's a necessary thing to get up to speed on the area, and so I recommend that.
Yeah, because also on the other side, on the western side, you've got the spot where Gorbachev gave his famous speech. tear down this wall. That happened there as well. And for the Adlon, one of the best books I've read about the Adlon was actually by Ian Fleming. He wrote a travel book called Thrilling Cities. And I think there were like a dozen or so cities, and he writes about the Adlon being in a really bad way in the early 50s, I think, when he was visiting, or maybe mid-50s, but around that period. It gives you a feel of what that post-World War II landscape looked like.
It was mostly destroyed during World War II,
Yes.
and only a remnant was saved and turned into the hotel. But then it was purchased after the wall went down and completely rebuilt. Anyway, it's magnificent, but it's also expensive.
Yes, very. Jason King, who you know from the show, he once took me for lunch there. The lovely schnitzel at the Adlon. I don't know if he paid for it. Or if knowing him, we probably did a runner. He probably didn't pay, but I remember
knowing
that.
Jason and his premier crew, he probably went up to the waiters and told them how wonderful it was and said, "Oh, I'll be right back. I'm going into the bathroom."
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was actually part of a Bernard Sampson book tour we did very early on in Spybrary's history, where we pitched up in Berlin and visited some of the sites from the Dayton books, and Jason came along, and that was a great memory. It was a great thing that we did. In that area as well, we've mentioned Checkpoint Charlie, and I think both of us agree that it is a complete and utter tourist trap right now as it stands. But it is worth still, I say, visiting, particularly when you think of the standoff of the tanks there, the fact we were so close to a potential World War III. You've written about this in the Spy Guides, how many spy novels actually include Checkpoint Charlie. Obviously, Spy came from the Cold is one of the most famous. The Start of Berlin game, they're there. Charlie Muffin and Charlie M books. So there's so much. So I would say to spy fiction fans in particular, it is worth going. And something that I need to double check online, but I'm pretty sure it's still there. It was something called TimeRide, and I think it was just off Zimmerstrasse on the corner. And it was a VR, virtual reality tour of East Berlin. So you basically get in, there's an exhibition on the GDR. They put you into this bus. Now, bear in mind, this was pre-COVID that I went on this. So I hadn't done much with VR at the time. And AI wasn't a thing, not for us civilians at that point. But they put you in this bus, they give you these goggles, and you pick which person. So there's 3 different East Germans that you can take on their persona, and you can then travel through Charlie and into East Berlin. And I highly recommend it, because first I thought this is going to be a bit Disney-fied, it's going to be a bit touristy, but it wasn't. It was actually really well done. And I was so new to VR technology, James, that I actually tried to take a picture of the old Palast with my iPhone, forgetting I had the goggles on. And they have one in Munich as well, TimeRide.
I've actually seen that. I did not have time to check it out, but that sounds like a very good idea.
I think they did a good job on it. Yeah.
There was also 1 or 2 movies that have included it in the filming, including one of the 007 movies with
Octopussy.
Yes,
Roger Moore and
Roger Moore. And in my book, there is a Stasi surveillance photo of the actor who was playing M.
Robert Brown, I believe, in that one.
Yeah,
yes.
And he's standing outside the BMW limousine that they're using in the movie, and it was taken from one of the Stasi towers. And I managed to dig that up in the Stasi archive. So
I love the inclusion of that. Slightly disappointed they didn't get Sir Roger, but he was obviously
he didn't
too
get out. He
them.
did not get out of the car apparently. So anyway,
he was straight off to the Adlon with Jason King, I'm sure.
Yeah. Having something.
There you go.
One of my acquisitions over the year, I got the omnibus edition. I had the paperbacks before, but they fell apart. And one of the things I really like about the omnibus edition is they have this inside the front cover.
Yes.
Which is a map of all the sites, most all the sites that Dayton describes.
For those who aren't watching on YouTube and are listening, James is showing us a copy of Game, Set and Match, Len Deighton Omnibus, which has a map of Berlin in the open cover. I agree. It's a good addition, that one.
You can go out and see his office at Olympia Stadium, but there's nothing to look at other than a big old building. It was in what was called the London block at Olympia Stadium. And right there on the third floor, you can see on the front side is where the SIS headquarters was.
Absolutely.
That's not one of my recommendations, because my last recommendation for the 3 places to visit is Glienicke Bridge,
Yes.
the so-called Bridge of Spies. And there's not a great deal to see there other than the bridge. I recommend going there early morning or late in the evening when the lights are on, or when you can see the transition. It's just a neat place to go. It's also fairly close to Frederick the Great's palace in Potsdam, Sanssouci. But being able to walk across the bridge and come back without being arrested is really neat. And you also get to see one of the primary dividing lines, the Havel River, between West Berlin and East Germany.
Yes.
And so it's just an amazing place to be, and it's really an integral part of the history. Francis Gary Powers, amongst other, was exchanged there. A couple of spies were exchanged at Checkpoint Charlie, but most of the exchanges were done at Glienicke Bridge. What the East Germans called Unity Bridge, which wasn't really a Unity Bridge, but the Bridge of Spies. And they used it in the movie as well with Tom Hanks.
Yeah. And it is a bit of a ways out, isn't it? Which is why a lot of people been to Berlin have never been to Glienicke Bridge.
23 kilometers, I think, from city center. So it's a ways out. And it's not, you can take an S-Bahn out there, or you can drive. Driving is the most efficient, I think.
Or take a bicycle. It's all set up.
That too. That's a bit of a trek.
Well, I've got to work off that beer and the currywurst somehow. And I like that you mentioned it earlier on, Imbiss, which maybe a word listeners aren't familiar with. It's a little takeaway counters that you include photos of them in the book. There's some very famous ones in Berlin, and you say what they were actually good spots for surveillance.
Well, 2 good snack foods are allegedly said to be born there. One is the currywurst, which is nothing more than a hot dog with or a bockwurst. Well, not a bockwurst. It's a red sausage. Forgot the name.
Bratwurst, is it?
Bratwurst, yes, absolutely. But then after the war, a matron who was selling these things in the Imbiss decided to spice up her stuff and acquired large quantities of ketchup and curry powder from the British and mixed it together and came up with this concoction, which was nothing more than a hot dog with a sauce and chips, of course, fries. And that became the currywurst. And then the other one is the doner kebab, which most Turks in Turkey will say is BS, but the original shop in Berlin is there, where they supposedly invented the doner kebab. It's a nice place to go, and a nice place to meet your Turkish case officer handler.
Well, that's what I like about your book is, you've also detailed some spy operations in here as well as the food, as well as, a lot of locations, which I think it makes a really good spy guide. The third choice for you. So we've got the Stasi Museum, Brandenburg Gate, and what would your third pick be?
That was it, the Bridge of Spies.
So Glienicke Bridge is the third.
Brandenburg Gate, the area around Brandenburg Gate.
I mean, you can spend hours around there, right? Because you've also included Neue Wache in this, which was a big site in East Berlin.
Museum Island also.
Yes.
All those areas there.
Absolutely. What about off the beaten track? A little bit for people who've been maybe, half dozen times and they want to go back and see something. You've got a lot in your book, but what would you suggest?
Well, this is actually my 4th choice, and it's not in the book, but I thought about it, and this is one that's not terribly spy related, but it's a very interesting place. It's called Citadel Spandau. And it's one of the best preserved and probably most important Renaissance fortresses in Europe. It was built by the Brandenburgers. It was on the site of a 13th century castle, and then it was rebuilt in the 16th century to protect the city from the west. And it's a perfect example of a stone fortress in the middle of the city. It sits at the confluence of two rivers. It's just a cool place to go. They've got a nice restaurant. You can view it. It was used during World War II as a laboratory for chemical weapons for the Nazis. That's a neat place, and it's right near the Spandau U-Bahn, so it's an easy walk. Probably the most hidden, not hidden, but the most bestest of my hidden gems is go see the Allied Museum, called the Alliierten Museum. It talks about the French, British, and U.S. occupation of the city. Talks about the Soviets. But one of the coolest things there, they have a reconstruction from original pieces of the Operation Gold tunnel.
Yes.
That went under the wall into East Berlin and tapped into the Soviet telephone lines, Soviet and East German telephone lines. So that's a really cool museum to go to. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time. It's also right near the old U.S. headquarters, which was a Luftwaffe headquarters there. And the first McDonald's that was ever built in Berlin.
Wow, there. We got to go just for that.
That's amazing, yeah.
I haven't been to the Allied Museum. Like I was saying, the thing I love about Berlin is that, like I say, I've been at least 20 times, and there are still things on my bucket list that I've yet to cross out and visit, which is great.
Right. It's well worth it. They're in the process of moving from where they're at, which is on Clay Alley. I put all the addresses in the book, at least the ones I could get of these places. But they're moving from that location to Tempelhof.
Really? Okay.
Which is also where they have one of the candy bombers from the Berlin airlift. So that'll be interesting.
I've been meaning to get over to Tempelhof. They have quite a few tours there as well, and those who watched the movie, is it Counterpart? Yes.
Yes.
Which was kind of sci-fi with a bit of spy. I quite enjoyed it, but they used Tempelhof a lot as the headquarters of the government or whatever, and it's just very, very different design.
It's a different design. It's one of the largest buildings in the world. It's just an amazing place. It has several underground levels, I think 5, which you can't get into. But the airfield itself, they were going to turn it into a big housing area because it's a very large green spot in the middle of the city. But protesters kept that from happening. So now what they have is a big, huge open park, which is actually nice. So it's a good thing that they preserved it. So.
It is, but also, as we know, with a lot of cities, homelessness is an issue. Berlin is becoming quite a big tech city now. They're trying to attract talent into Berlin. So I can kind of see why they want to build more houses as well. And
I think they're going to have to go out rather than in. So
no, I think you're right. I would add, so one of the places I visited, and again, it's a little off the beaten track, but I spent a number of hours there, was the cemetery out in Friedrichsfelde, which is where you have, Wilhelm Pieck's grave, Marcus Wolf's grave, Konrad Wolf's grave. They're all there. All the Illuminati of the GDR regime are all there. And you'll see a lot of pictures of Honecker and others giving speeches there every year. And I took a trip out there. It's a little again, away from the touristy spots, but I thoroughly enjoyed. I remember walking through it one early morning and getting weird looks from older ladies who were putting down flowers, maybe for grandparents or parents. I didn't hang around to ask, but you could see they were like, why is this guy here? And I was just mooching about, trying to see who I recognized. They reckon Milka's buried there too, but in a unmarked grave. understandable.
I had debated on putting that into the book, but I decided it was a bit too macabre. Not the most the only other site that I mentioned that's sort of in that vein is Hohenschönhausen prison, which is very depressing. It's an interesting site, but it can be very depressing. And all the people that work there are ex-prisoners.
Yeah, that's the thing. I would agree with you, James. I went a couple of years ago, and it was interesting. I recorded, at that point, I was producing a podcast called Radio GDR, all about East German history. And I'd visited and had the tour. And as you say, the guide is actually a former prisoner. And I remember walking out of there and just so upset and angry and thought, why am I don't ever want anyone to look at what I'm doing with Radio GDR and say, you're just, glamorizing a totalitarian regime. I certainly wasn't. I almost killed the podcast on the spot because I thought I never want that allegation. Then I feel like, no, these are important stories. They're like your work as well, James. It's important to share this because, never again, although I think in the current world...
If you forget it, you tend to repeat it. And some people that don't forget also. But
yeah. And again, in a lot of TV and movies, Hohenschönhausen was used as well. So you see the yards and the special, trucks that they would use to bring. And, when you read that they would bundle somebody in a truck, say in East Berlin, drive around for 4 hours. So, the poor prisoner thinks that, they're going to Dresden or somewhere, and actually they've just gone 10 minutes up the road. Everything was psychological torture with them, wasn't it? Well, not everything, but a lot of it was psychological.
Well, they did that to people's lives without even arresting them. What they called Zersetzung, basically disassemble. They just tore people apart. It's much like what do they call it now on social media when you get torn apart by everybody and you just want to kill yourself, or in some cases people have. So it's pretty sad, whole history.
Another site I visited, which is a little out of the way, is Funkhaus Nalepa-Strasse. I'm probably butchering the name. So as you can tell, I do podcasts. I love radio. Always loved radio as a kid. One of my favorite things to do, because we didn't have internet when I was a kid. So if I wanted to hear a foreign accent or a language, I had to twiddle the shortwave radio to hear different languages. So, Radio Berlin International, which I guess was the equivalent of RAIS and the current Voice of America. It was the East German propaganda arm. And I got to meet somebody who worked as an engineer there as a early 20s. I think he was working there as an engineer. And he took me on I visited and he took us. You can get tours there because apparently the performing suite, they would bring orchestras and bands in as some of the best acoustics in that building. So they've kept that, but obviously there's not huge amounts around from RBI and places, but there's some of the studios are still there, and he took me in and walked me around. So that was great, because as a kid, twiddling in and getting Radio Berlin International, and then be able to go in there. Maybe that's just the geek in me, but that was a good trip out. And of course you've got that depressing fairground, what's it called now? Plant something that just got abandoned that you can see out there. Plantwalder, is it? Or Plantwalder?
I can't remember. The former headquarters for RIA's radio in the American sector is also still there, and it's functioning as a radio station. But there is also a small museum, which is, if you're interested in radio and propaganda, it's an interesting place to go.
Because you include it in the book, of course, it still has the original logo on top of the building, which I wasn't aware of that, so I need to go visit.
Yeah, it's there.
I would say I would say as well, Jim, something that I think is important for people to go to. Like, if I could only say one site, if you only got time for one site, it would be to the Berlin Wall Memorial in Bernauer Strasse, because they've kept that strip, haven't they? So you can go up on the observation tower and really look at. It's not just a wall you can shuffle over. I mean, the hall, the barbed wire, the sand, the dogs, the watchtower. You can just see how difficult that was, how heavily fortified the Berlin Wall was. And I think it's important.
That was the one I was going to mention next. Was the Bernauer Strasse and Wall Museum, but there's another one right nearby, which is not well advertised, and it's called Underground Berlin.
Yes.
And if you put that into your internet, it will come up with the German website. It's Untergrund Berlin. And you can book a tour with them, and they will take you down into the subterranean part of Berlin, and you can see the tunnels that were, you can see the remnants of some of the tunnels that were built, and you can go into the Cold War and actually World War II bunkers that were used to protect people. And it's a very interesting tour. They do it in English, French, German, so it's a very good tour.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about Berlin, certainly over the last 20, 25 years that I've been visiting, is that, you know, when originally I went to Normannenstrasse, there was nothing in English at all. Everything was German. Now you do have language options in most places, which are good. And I agree with you. I was lucky enough to go on that tour. And it's quite tricky to get on. It gets booked up quite quickly. So I would say if that appeals to you, and we'll put the links in the show notes, book it up early. It's run by a non-profit company, I understand. And I agree, and I think the highlight of that, not just for seeing some of the tunnels that was dug by escapees, but there's that one part where they open that metal door and you're on the U-Bahn platform. I felt very James Bond. I thought for the first time in my life, I feel like a spy coming through this door, and I'm sure they're all over cities like London, because that was a question I had for you as well, with the wall being so unique as a challenge. I mean, how did the Stasi get people in and out? How did the West get people in and out, other than through, Charlie and the Palace of Tears? Were there other places? I've read about doors being built, certainly by the Stasi, to get their people in and out.
I talk about it a little bit, my Special Forces Berlin, and then I have one section in the spy guide that talks about Schleusen, basically slipways that the East Germans use. And my final hidden place was actually a restaurant, but it's a restaurant that's very close to the Friedrichstrasse Bahnhof, which was the central Bahnhof in Berlin that you could travel into from West Berlin, and then you could go onto the U-Bahn and go back into West Berlin. So we use that for one of our practice sites a number of times.
Right.
But the Schleusen that they had at Friedrichstrasse Bahnhof doesn't exist anymore, but it was a station where they could get their officers into the S-Bahn station and pass beyond the control measures so that no one would see them. No one would see them going to controls. But there were also doors that they built into the wall, various spots around the city. And unfortunately, I never got a picture of one, but they were used by the East Germans to bring people in. Sometimes they're officers, sometimes agents. And it was also used, they were also used by smugglers that were able to co-opt some of these Germans. We located a lot of them. And of course, the East Germans built the wall not to keep West Berliners out of East Germany, but to keep East Germans and East Berliners out of West Berlin. So the design was looking back into their own country, not so much looking into the West, which was a small weakness and an advantage for us because we were looking at going in both directions. So some of those figured into our plans. Waterways figured into our plans because they could not throw a curtain in the water. And the subways to some extent, but those became closed off more and more as technology was put in place that could monitor those areas. So there were weaknesses in the wall, but every year it got better and better.
Yeah. We don't have time to go into it today, but you also write about things going bad. So I wasn't aware of the Karl-Heinz Kuras story. That's the West Berlin police officer you write about.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a gun nut for one thing, and then he was also, I think, probably psychologically more oriented towards the right wing than anything, and saw communism basically, or the communist government, as um, a better system for what he envisioned the world. And he became a informant for the Stasi and was
Mm.
providing them a lot of information. He went really badly off the reservation, to make it short, to make this a short presentation, but he ended up shooting a demonstrator during a protest in West Berlin, which was well outside what the East Germans wanted him to do,
Yeah.
but was very actually beneficial to the East Germans because it showed the West German government as being repressive. And the East Germans were very much into trying to do that. The East German, the Stasi, was also very supportive of terrorist movements that were working in Western Europe, and I talk about that to a great extent. Um, they actually had a section within Stasi that was charged with training and assisting terrorists. Among those was, of course, Carlos the Jackal, and the Libyan bombers who blew up the disco inside West Berlin. So there are a lot of interesting stories about the East German terrorists.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mixed these in as well into the spy guide. And just going back to this guy, I think what's interesting, particularly for those of us who enjoy spy fiction, and I always say that spy fact can be stranger than spy fiction, is he was recruited, Karl-Heinz Kuras, whose code name was Otto Bohl, and he was recruited into West German police when I believe he was a regular West Berlin police officer. But in time, he kept getting transferred to the criminal Polizei, and then also to a department within Kripo that was responsible for protecting the police against infiltration attempts from East Germany. This sensitive area of the West Berlin police had been a top target for the Stasi, and now Kuras was inside. So they played the patient game, the waiting game. They had no idea that was going to happen to him, right? It just kind of was fortuitous that he would make it to that division.
They encouraged him to make the proper
Sure.
training moves and everything else. Yeah, that was one of the big things. We knew, and would have probably worked with a lot of West German police officers had war come, because they were essentially the protection for the city. There was no West German military in Berlin. But that was one of their prime worries, was getting their people recruited by the East Germans, and it was a problem. And Kuras was probably the most egregious example.
Mm.
There were a number of others that were not caught or located until long after the wall went down and the records came out. So,
and then you also included the story of another U.S. Soldier who the Stasi, they weren't just listening in on politicians and the military. They were listening to as many conversations as they could. And they'd overheard a conversation I think he'd had with his bank about financial worries. So they approached him saying, we can give you money, help us out. This is a very abridged version. But he went back to the military and said, I've had an approach. Whereas in most spy fiction, the person takes the money and then the story falls. So it was kind of nice to read. Here's a soldier who's done the right thing. He's gone straight to his bosses and said, hey, I just got this approach. And then they played him like a fish, the Stasi. And you have to read Jim's book to see how that one ends up. But I really like that you included these stories along with the sites, because that's what makes a true travel experience. It's not just here's a landmark. It's like what happened. Like I talked about KaDeWe. I see KaDeWe with a different light now. I will go in there and imagine some of the shenanigans that went on. So I appreciate you including that in your Berlin Spy Guide. I'd like to finish, if I may. When you read spy fiction, particularly books set in Berlin, James, that with you having served there, which authors get it right? And I don't mean in terms of the intelligence services, of special forces. I mean, who captures Berlin? Whose book do you read and go, oh, that's the Berlin I remember? And admittedly, I know you were there primarily in the 70s, right? But were there any of those books you thought, yeah, this is spot on?
Well, of course, Len Deighton gets much of that correct. KaDeWe did not handle Berlin much, except for the spy who came in for the cold, but he handles it pretty well, but it's kind of obscurely. I think Dayton is the best. Paul Vidic has had a couple of stories in Berlin, and those get pretty well. Joseph Cannon,
Yes.
I quote as one of the best. And that's really interesting too, because actually there was one restaurant I was going to mention that's called Gannymed, Ganymed, and it's very close to Friedrichstrasse Bahnhof. It's also close to Bertolt Brecht Theater, who incidentally plays a big part in Leaving Berlin, Joseph Cannon's book. But Gannymed is also mentioned by Len Deighton in Berlin Game, and it's a great restaurant. I love it because it's also right in the center of all these interesting things. The Widenhammer Brücke, which played a big part in World War II. But the fact that Bertolt Brecht is in close proximity to this restaurant, and Bertolt Brecht is one of the stars in Cannon's book, just ties everything together. And it's also a neat place to go and sit because it's right next to the river, and you can enjoy your food right there, or just a glass of wine. It's just a neat place to go.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. And I love it. I read the Ganymede because, of course, that's where a lot of these German officials went to. And obviously Stasi were in there looking for them to meet because you say it was right near the theater. But, Joe Cannon definitely included that in, oh, crikey, I forget. Was it Leaving Berlin? No, it wasn't that one. It'll come back to me. What was his book? Berlin Exchange. That was it.
Berlin Exchange.
There was one year, where Vesperman, Vidic, and Cannon all brought out a Berlin book because there was Winter Work that came out by Vesperman, and they were all really good. But I was like, wow, we're being spoiled.
It's either 23 or 24. So, yeah. Anyway, Vidic has done a couple. Mick Herron, Secret Hours, also talks about Berlin, but Mick Herron will admit that he does not do a whole lot of location research.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And it's also interesting, it doesn't have to capture Berlin spot on, because at the end of the day, these are works of fiction. But I think you're right with Dayton in particular, because I think, Dayton loves Berlin as a place anyway. He traveled there a lot. He had friends in both the East and the West. I mean, it's incredible. He wrote the foreword to John Pete's book. John Pete wrote The Long Engagement. He was Reuters man in West Berlin, defected to East Germany and became, the head of the press there. He edited a news. So I can get geeky on this stuff, but the Democratic German Report, which was an English language newspaper that was primarily sent out to the trade unions of Europe, particularly in the UK, and it was the GDR's version of events. And he edited that, and he defected. He became very good friends with Len Deighton. Now, I think it's fair to say Len is no fan of the communists, but still was sitting down with people of that belief and learning about Berlin. And I think that really does come across in his writing, particularly the Samson series.
Both Dayton and Cannon, I think, capture the mood of the people in East Berlin. Probably the best. It's it just kind of permeates through the colors and the smells and the paranoia that was involved there.
Absolutely. I'm just looking. I have a quote about Berlin that I just want to read out. It's one of the famous ones, and I really ought to know this off by heart. So I'll just edit this. Sorry, Jim. Here we go. It's worth waiting for. Did you ever say hello to a girl you almost married long ago? Did she smile the same captivating smile and give your arm a hug in a gesture you'd almost forgotten? Did the wrinkles as she smiled make you wonder what marvelous times you'd missed? That's how I felt about Berlin every time I came back here. And obviously he's writing that through Bernard Sampson, but this is really Len. And I've been lucky enough through Rob, who runs the Epic Dayton dossier site, to have a few emails back and forth with Len. I mean, he was thrilled when we took the Bernard Sampson tour. But just that quote alone is how I think about Berlin. And you'll be the first to acknowledge, James, I'm sure, that, you know, every time you go back to Berlin, it changes, right? It's going through so much transformation just in a matter of years, let alone the decades.
It's similar, but it's also completely different. And I mean, I've visited a lot of towns, and I love going to certain places for certain things: Paris, Cape Town, even Nairobi, and some other Shanghai. You know, other interesting places. But none of them, like I said, none of them have left what Berlin has left with me. So I just have to keep going back.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that was the thing. I read your Spies guide, and I also took a week off social, or tried to take a week off social media as much as I could, and read Berlin Game. And now I want to book flights. Now I'm actually going to the UK, probably in there when this hits the airwaves, and I'm like, I need to go back to Berlin. And some of the sites that you've written about here, particularly those in the western part of the city, because I was just, you know, head out to the east and go explore and find these places off the beaten track. So there's plenty more in here for me to discover. So thank you very much for writing this book, James. It's going to be very useful for all our Spybrarians that are taking their holidays or their trips across to the Hauptstadt. So thank you very much for joining us. The book is available on Amazon. I understand, and if this is a secret, then we can edit this bit out, but that you are also working on a coffee table edition. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm not sure when that one's going to happen. There is a hardback version that's coming out soon, or is actually out now, and that's approximately the same size, but in a much better bound version with high quality paper, and of course the photos will reflect that. The coffee table version is we'll see.
Okay.
Part of it's going to be interest, and part of it's going to be the investment of how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a nerd extraordinaire when it comes to the GDR in Berlin, but I have several coffee table books that have cost me a fortune to buy. Some of those produced by the GDR government back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
I love hitting flea markets in Germany, particularly the former East Germany, and picking up, I mean, they're not bargains anymore because people know the cost or the value. They used to be back in the day, like you with your binoculars would get some absolute bargains, but anything GDR memorabilia now, they know the value for geeks like me. I mean, when I snuff it, I doubt they'll fetch much locally, but for me...
I have to admit, I'm also a geek. I got offered a T-72 while I was in Berlin once, and I had to pass on that one because I didn't think I could get it into the post office. But whatever. No, Berlin, like I said, it's one of my favorite cities, and I'll take any event or any opportunity, I guess, to go back. So.
Well, we definitely need to organize, I get asked this a lot, a Berlin Spybrary meetup again. And I think if I was to do that again, it would be nice to do it over a series of days, because already, you know, we try and shoot for 45-minute episodes on Spybrary, and Jim and I are at 1 hour 20, and I've still got a stack of questions here and observations about the book that we won't get to. So I think a couple of days in Berlin needed, and also to go further afield. I mean, there are places like Eisenhüttenstadt right out, you know, that were DDR model towns, etc., centrally planned. I'd love to get out to some of those as well, but can't do it all on one trip.
Up to the Baltic, and go surfing or something.
Yeah, I tell you where I did go a couple of years in the pre-COVID times. I went to Dresden, and I went to the Stasi museum there. And then if you cross the road, you go through this very suburban street, and there's no signs on it, of course, but it was the former KGB station, and that's where Putin allegedly came out in '89 and just said to the German protesters, "This is Soviet soil," and no one messed with him. And you're like, thank God he wasn't in Berlin at the time, James.
Yeah, if I had known who he was, but anyway, that's where he's got a Stasi ID card. That's
Yes.
in the museum now, and it's issued in Dresden.
And should you want to, you can go to the pub where he used to drink. I believe he was there with his family, working for the Soviets. So Dresden's another great city to visit. Anyway, we're all talking about Berlin. Berlin, A Spy's Guide to its Cold War History in Story and Image, written by James Stejskal. Thank you very much for giving us well over an hour of your time today, James, and sharing more about Berlin with us.
It's a place I love to share my knowledge and experiences with, so I guess I will be signing off from Alexandria Station here.
Fantastic. Let us know in the comments, particularly those of you who are watching us on YouTube, what Berlin sites have we not spoken about today that you really recommend people go visit? Or if you've got any questions for Jim on Berlin, maybe you're planning a trip, I'm sure he'll be happy to help you with that. So let us know in the comments. And come join us in the Spybrary community. James is in there as well. And we chat spy fiction and espionage history every single day. You can find that at spybrary.com/community. Dankeschön, James.
Bitte.